Can you turn on the lights in here? Oh, much better. Oh, and look! Everybody's at full HP! How about that? You know what time it is? Holy Paladin guide time! That's what time it is! Get your talents, gear, rotation, tips and tricks, and everything you need for raiding and Mythic Plus dungeons. So let's kick it off with the talents. Alright, as you can probably guess, we'll be talking about the awesome Glimmer build. It's not the so-called basic build, but this particular build is so cool that it's simply not worth not doing, since it will go away once the trait becomes obsolete. As such, everything in this video will focus on this build, so keep that in mind. On the first row you take Crusader's Might, no questions asked. Holy Shock is your main ability, and reducing its cooldown is crucial to making the build work. Second row depends on the content. For raiding, Rule of Law will always be the best option, since the playstyle will put you into melee zone, and to properly heal the range group you need to have that little extra range and buff to your mastery. For dungeons, Unbreakable Spirit is the go-to. The defensives you have are very strong, and to compensate for that, the cooldowns are big. This solves that. Not to mention, you will actually be able to rotate them in a run. Plus, this opens up the ability to use Divine Protection on Sacrifice windows and Light of the Martyr windows when you need to spam quick heals on your tank. Not to mention the general purpose of reducing damage taken. All around, best talent for dungeons. Third row again depends on the content. For raid, take either Fist of Justice or Repentance. I would recommend Fist since it's more reliable. Repentance needs to be communicated, so if your raid leader asks, you can take it. For dungeons, Blinding Light. This can work for spell interrupts or simply helping your tank get some breathing room. Ideally, you want your party to not insta-break the disorients, so just keep in mind that that would be an issue to deal with. Fourth row, for all content, you take Devotion Aura by default. The damage reduction adds up, and as a rule of thumb, it's always better to prevent damage than to heal damage. The other two options are good anyway, especially Aura of Mercy in raids, and you will need to play around with it, but starting off and also generally better, go with Devotion Aura. Level 75, pick Holy Avenger. It shouldn't be a surprise. 30% haste? Meaning literally Bloodlust? And more healing on Holy Shock? Yes, a million times yes! Plus, the cooldown is fairly short. Sanctified Wrath is the go-to for level 90. Again, Holy Shock synergy. Avenging Wrath lasting longer is great, of course, but what you really are interested in is the Holy Shock cooldown reduction. Last row you have two options. As a default, and especially mandatory for raids, Divine Purpose is the go-to. 20% chance of no cooldown on Holy Shock is rounding up the build and works together with the rest to provide you with more and more glimmers overall. The other option is Beacon of Virtue. Beacon of Virtue is good if you have problems stopping people off. It can work wonders in dungeons with bursting or a high damage affix that requires you to do massive burst AoE healing, especially when you can't stay in melee and spam Crusader strikes. Playing the build properly requires you have specific gear, and until that happens, the general stat priority is eye level first because intellect is the best. Follow that up by crit, then mastery, then haste, and versatility last. Once you do have the glimmer traits, the stats change, meaning you'll have haste at the top with mastery as a close second. Critical strike is third with verse very close by, and intellect, meaning eye level, last. This doesn't mean that you should sack 15 eye levels or something crazy like that. It means that haste rounds up the build, reducing the cooldown of major abilities that make the build what it is. Mastery also complements this build a lot more than the standard build. Your mastery will basically increase the strength of your heals the closer you are to your target. The tooltip doesn't do well explaining this. Basically, the number you see on the tooltip is the minimum amount you will heal for when the target is super far away. Once they are close, that heal is boosted, and from what I can tell, the extra healing the mastery provides is susceptible to spell power increases, meaning that you heal for more than it looks like on paper. This is why in raids you take Rule of Law. The playstyle will put you in melee range of the mob because you will be crusade striking a lot, and if you have to heal the range group 10 to 30 yards away, you can't just walk up to them or heal them for 50% reduced healing. With this in mind, let's look at the overall trinkets you might want to aim for. To be honest, you would want to haste proc trinkets ideally, but don't feel too restricted to using only those. Crest of Paku has the most overwhelming use, and it's not difficult to see why. This drops from Conclave, and the haste proc alone should be a good reason for you to pick it up when raiding. Two other really good raid trinkets are Ignition Mage's Fuse from Tol Dagor and Voice Stone from Crucible. The Voice Stone is not a haste proc clearly, but the shield it puts on the target can work wonders. Although the trinkets mentioned are used generally by the community in raids, you can easily take them in dungeons. But if you really want to min-max, aim for Conch of the Dark Whispers and the Alchemist Stone when doing Mythic Plus. The Conch drops from Shrine of the Storm, and the Alchemist Stone you need to make from alchemy because profession trading is forbidden for high-end crafted stuff. And now we get to the good stuff, Azerite traits. A quick mention here, the guide is coming out awfully close to 8.2. No changes have been announced for Holy Paladins yet, and the only thing left to discuss, although we will update everything once Season 3 starts and we have access to all the new gear, I will still put down below anything that you need to know for 8.2, so until then, feel free to use everything in this video. The first trait that we will look at is Glimmer of Light, which you need to have at least 2 of, but ideally 3. This is the build maker, what changes our talents and playstyle. This trait is an example of a really good designed and interesting trait, and if all the traits in the game are like this one, people wouldn't have shit to say about Azerite. Well, they would, we all have shit to say always, but that's not the point. The trait makes your Holy Shock leave a 30-second buff or debuff depending on who you shock, and when you shock a target that has Glimmer on them already, all other targets with Glimmer get either healed or damaged. More on this in the rotation. The second trait I super highly recommend you take is Bonded Souls. It adds healing and haste, which is the main stat you are looking for anyway. And if you want to be nifty, also pick one Light Decree. To take this you need to switch to Retribution since it's a red trait. You want this for the extra 5 seconds of Avenging Wrath. Yep, it's that good. The rest you want pure damage traits, since to be honest, Holy doesn't have amazing traits outside of Glimmer in my opinion. The two traits that stand out the most are Treacherous Covenant and Radiant Incandescence, and you can stack these as many times as you can and you should be peachy. For secondary traits and tertiary if you want to be nitpicky, things like Life Speed perform good, Resounding Protection, Stalwart Protector, and generally any utility trait will work just fine. The rotation is played around the two main healing and damaging cooldowns, Avenging Wrath and Holy Avenger. Both increase your overall throughput and kinda serve the same purpose with one or two differences. Avenging Wrath increases your crit chance by 30%, and Holy Shock having baseline 30% crit means you will probably crit with all of the shocks during this cooldown. Ideally, before using it, you want to have as many glimmers out as possible to use this to its maximum efficiency. Holy Avenger is a personal bloodlust with an increase in the Holy Shock healing, meaning that although you could use Avenging Wrath to also deal damage, this one you would want to keep for pure healing. One more thing before going into the actual rotation. With the talent Crusader's Might, Holy Shock and Light of Dawn cooldowns are reduced by 1.5 seconds every time you use Crusader's Strike. Since your average GCD is a little over 1 second, you never want to use Crusader Strikes when either of these two have 2 or few seconds left remaining for safe measure, since the cooldown reduction will be wasted on the GCD, and cooldown reduction is very important for Holy Shock especially. Now the rotation outside the two major cooldowns discussed is as follows. Use Holy Shock as often as you can on as many people as you can without overhealing and without letting your tank die if he or she is taking massive damage. Light of Dawn should also be used on as many targets as you can, especially in raids. Third on the list, Crusader Strike to reduce the cooldown. For this you will always need to be in melee range of the boss, so keep in mind that melee tactics is something you might need to do, and also if there are mechanics aimed at healers, they will probably still hit you if you're in melee. Lastly, Flash of Light or Holy Light buffed by Infusion of Light. Since the priority will go to Holy Shocks, you might end up wasting Infusion of Light procs, which is okay. Normally you want to consume the infusion with Holy Light since it's more mana efficient and it's faster to cast. Flash of Light, however, will simply heal for more in one GCD. If mana is a struggle for you, keep this in mind. That was the rotation outside the cooldowns, well, the priority for that. Now let's check the one during any of the two major healing cooldowns. Holy Shock is still on the top of the priority list, with a mention to make sure the tank without your beacon has the glimmer buff on. Crusader Strike climbs in priority because during your cooldowns, Holy Shock is a much more important spell, in turn resetting its cooldown takes priority over Light of Dawn. Third on the list is Light of Dawn, but mostly as a filler when the two other are on cooldown. Last on the list is Flash of Light, with the same argument as before. You should never cast naked Holy Light, by the way, and if you find yourself in a situation where you need to activate both Avenging Wrath and Holy Avenger, which personally I don't recommend, you will not have any GCDs to spare for fillers, so don't worry about casting Flash of Light then. A few tips I picked up along the way from much more experienced paladins. With the Unbreakable Spirit talent, you can combine Sacrifice with Divine Protection to reduce the damage you take and still reliably have it again to protect you in the future. The same thing can be said about Divine Protection and Light of the Martyr. If for some reason you cannot afford to cast a spell and Shock is on cooldown, but your tank is dying, you'll need to spam Light of the Martyrs, and combining it with Divine Protection will help, especially in weeks with bursting or heavy healer affixes. There are a lot more tips and tricks and things you can go in depth with when it comes to Holy Paladins. So if you want to add anything I haven't mentioned, use the comment section down below where I left a pinned comment. Share your love and knowledge with the people. Stat priority or not, when it comes to enchants and gems, we get haste in all slots. And no, not even the intellect gem is better. For the weapon, again, quick navigation for the haste proc buff. When getting food, the feast will still be better since 100 intellect is better than 70 haste, but when not raiding or when playing with stingy bastards, get the highest haste food you can afford. For the alchemical needs, Flask of Endless Fathoms and Battle Potion of Intellect is the go-to. You can consider the Potion of Replenishment if you can take a 10-second break to get some mana back, but that would mean you would lose most of your glimmers by then. If you just picked up the Holy Paladin and you don't have all the glimmer traits and you cannot be bothered to heal the standard way, then check our red and proc guides that we already have up on our channel, and you can start picking the specs up right now and go do some dungeons, raids with everything you need from talent, gear rotation, tips and tricks, and all the general knowledge you will ever use. Shout out to our Patreons. We love you guys for supporting and making our dreams a reality. And if you want to become a Patreon as well and support our channel, links down in the description. And you know it's time to be rocking some of that MarcelianOnline merch, am I right? Get your t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, mugs, all from the official Teespring links down below. I mean, just imagine yourself in one of these babies. Oh, beautiful. Thanks for watching the video and being awesome, and I'll see you next time.